The land is quiet in the way that only dying things are quiet. What was once a broad, reed-lined river has pulled back to a thin, brown thread running between cracked banks. The trees that lined it, cycads, tree ferns, the first flowering plants still finding their place in a world not quite ready for them, stand pale and still in the breathless heat. No wind moves through the valley. The sky above is a flat, bleached white, and the sun presses down without mercy. At the edge of what remains of the waterline, a herd of hadrosaurs stands in uneasy stillness. There are perhaps 200 of them, adults, subadults, and juveniles pressed close to the bodies of their mothers. The largest among them stand 5 meters at the shoulder. They are broad-backed, long-tailed, and in better times they would be browsing continuously, moving through lush vegetation with the unhurried confidence of animals that have little to fear. But these are not better times. The vegetation around them has been grazed to nothing. The mud at the river's edge carries the prints of weeks of repeated visits, the same animals, returning to the same diminishing source, again and again. The water that remains is shallow and warm and faintly brackish. It is no longer enough. Something in the behavior of the oldest individuals begins to shift. Scientists believe that in many large herd animals, migration decisions are not made collectively in any conscious sense, they emerge from the accumulated restlessness of many bodies reaching the same threshold at the same time. One by one, and then in groups, the animals begin to turn. Away from the dry riverbed. Away from the exhausted land. Toward the north, where the horizon holds no particular promise, only the vast, unreadable possibility of somewhere else. The journey has begun. They move in the early morning, when the heat is still bearable. The sound of their passage is immense, a deep, rhythmic percussion of thousands of feet on hard ground, the low, resonant calls that pass between individuals, the occasional sharp sound of a juvenile stumbling and being steadied by a larger body nearby. From a distance, the herd appears almost fluid, a living river flowing across the landscape, following the long, slow curves of the terrain as naturally as water. But the terrain is not kind. The floodplains that once made this region fertile are cracked and pale. The soil, no longer held together by the root systems of the plants that have withered, breaks into fine dust that rises around the herd in long amber clouds, drifting south on the faint breath of wind that moves at ground level. The animals breathe it in. Their wide, sensitive nostrils filter what they can. Their eyes, already adapted to scanning wide-open spaces for movement, squint against the haze. It is believed that hadrosaurs, like many large herd-forming herbivores, maintained a loose but functional social structure during migration. Older, larger individuals set the pace and the general direction. Younger animals follow, staying close to those they know. Sub-adults move at the fringes, alert and uncertain. The structure is not rigid, it does not need to be. What holds the herd together is not hierarchy but something older and simpler. The deep, biological pull toward the collective. The understanding, encoded in instinct rather than thought, that alone there is no future. The first days pass without dramatic incident. The herd covers ground steadily. They move through the remnants of a forest, skeletal trunks standing in dry red soil, the canopy reduced to sparse patches of shadow that offer little real shade. They cross a low ridge, and on the other side find a wide, shallow depression where water pooled weeks ago and is now only a series of gray circles in the dust. They investigate it anyway. They always investigate. And then they move on. The young stay close. The old do not slow. Not yet. By the end of the first week, the herd is smaller. Not dramatically, not all at once. But the mathematics of migration are unforgiving, and they work quietly, without announcement. An elderly female, one of the largest in the group, began to fall behind on the third day. Her gait had always carried a slight irregularity, evidence, perhaps, of an old injury, a healed fracture that left the bones slightly thickened and the joints slightly stiff. For years, in the abundance of the valley, this had mattered very little. Now, on hard ground, over long distances, it matters a great deal. She did not stop moving. That instinct, forward, always forward, remained intact even as her pace declined. The herd flowed past her gradually, the way a river flows past a stone. There was no distress signal strong enough to alter the course of the whole. Individual calls were answered. Contact was maintained for a time. And then the gap widened beyond the range of sound, and she was alone in the dust behind the herd, still walking north, still following a direction she could no longer close. Scientists suggest that in herding animals, the loss of individuals at the margins of migration is not an aberration. It is part of the mechanism. The herd as a whole is shaped and refined by the journey itself. What arrives at the destination is not what departed, it is a distillation. The strongest, the most resilient, the most precisely adapted to exactly the conditions the migration has imposed. This does not make the losses less real. It only places them in context. 2 juveniles are lost on the 5th day, not to weakness but to the sudden appearance of a deeply cut ravine that the herd crossed in a press of bodies. The crossing was fast and uncontrolled, driven by momentum. Most made it without injury. The 2 that did not were too young to have learned how to fall, and the drop was too far. The herd moved on. It could not have done otherwise. By the time the first week closes, perhaps a dozen individuals are gone. In a herd of 200, this is a number that changes the shape of the group only slightly. But each one was an animal that had eaten, and breathed, and walked this earth for years. And the land simply absorbed them, as it absorbs everything, without comment. On the 8th day, the predators find them. It is not unexpected. A herd of this size, moving across open terrain, trailing dust visible for kilometers, leaving a track of broken ground and dung that any hunting animal with functional senses can follow with ease, this is not a herd that moves in secret. It is a herd that moves in mass, relying on numbers rather than concealment as its primary defense. The first theropods appear at dusk, when the heat finally begins to release its grip and the light goes horizontal and orange across the plain. There are 3 of them, large, bipedal, moving with the unhurried confidence of animals that have learned patience. Scientists believe that many large theropods were opportunistic rather than strategic hunters. They did not plan an ambush so much as they positioned themselves and waited for the herd's own movement to create an opportunity. The herd knows they are there. The response is immediate and collective, a tightening of the group, the juveniles pulled inward, the larger animals forming the outer edge. The calls that move through the herd change register, becoming shorter, more urgent. The pace does not slow. If anything, it accelerates slightly, a barely perceptible compression of movement that travels through the group like a wave. For hours, the predators shadow the herd without engaging. They are testing, in the way that large predators test, looking for hesitation, for separation, for the individual that moves differently from the rest. The herd, to its credit, does not easily offer one. The collective vigilance is extraordinary. Every adult on the outer edge holds its position. Every juvenile stays pressed against an adult flank. But the land itself is working against them. Ahead, the terrain narrows. A long shelf of exposed rock forces the herd to compress further, moving in a column rather than a broad front. Here, the outer edges cannot hold as wide a formation. Here, the predators move closer. The attack, when it comes, is fast and loud and over in seconds. One individual, a sub-adult on the eastern flank, slightly slower than those beside it, perhaps simply unlucky in its position, is separated from the column by the sudden convergence of 2 of the theropods moving in from opposite sides. The herd surges forward. There is nothing else it can do. The sounds of the attack fade quickly behind the thunder of its own movement. The 3rd theropod does not pursue the herd further. It waits. The herd does not look back. Instinct does not permit it. The 9th day brings something new to torment them, heat reflected off a vast pale expanse of dry salt flat that stretches across their path, offering no alternative route they can detect or navigate. They cross it in silence, the adults moving steadily, the juveniles struggling with the brightness and the heat that radiates from the ground itself. Several animals drink from their own bodies in the only way available to them, panting, losing moisture they cannot replace. The oldest among them show signs of significant dehydration. Their movements become slower, more deliberate. The 10th day is the hardest of all. No shade. No water. A wind that offers no cooling, only the sensation of hot air moving across hot skin. The calls within the herd become less frequent. Conservation of energy is no longer a choice. And yet they do not stop. On the evening of the 11th day, something changes. There is a shift in the air, barely perceptible, the kind of thing that no instrument could easily measure but that an animal tuned to exactly this signal would register immediately. The air carries faint moisture. Not rain. Not yet. But the memory of water, carried on a wind that has come from somewhere that still has it. The herd stops. The oldest females hold absolutely still, their heads raised, their nostrils working steadily. For a long moment, perhaps a full minute, nothing moves. 200 animals, standing in the last light of the 11th day, listening to something that cannot be heard. And then, slowly, the direction of movement shifts. It is not a decision in any sense we would recognize. There is no deliberation, no weighing of options. There is only the reading of a signal so ancient that it predates the herd, predates the species, predates everything except the most fundamental equation of life: where water is, there is a chance. And where there is a chance, you go. They begin to move again. Faster now. The exhaustion is still there, it has not left, it will not leave, but beneath it, something has lifted. The pace is different. The calls are different. Even the juveniles, moving on thin legs and dwindling reserves, seem to carry themselves with slightly less effort. The night passes in movement. On the morning of the 12th day, the first animals reach the river. It is not a dramatic river. It is not a wide, rushing torrent. It is a quiet, steady flow through low vegetation, grasses and ferns and flowering plants along the banks, trees standing in full leaf above them, shade falling across the water in long broken patterns. It is, by any objective measure, modest. To the herd, it is everything. They drink for a long time. They move into the shallows, standing flank to flank, their heads down, their breathing slowing for the first time in days. The juveniles wade into the shallower margins, the contact with cool water visibly altering their behavior, the tension in their bodies releasing, the high, constant alertness dropping several registers. The vegetation on the banks is dense. The browsing begins almost immediately, animals pulling at the plants with the steady, methodical movements of animals that have been hungry for too long and now find themselves surrounded by food. They eat without haste and without stopping. They will eat for days. But they are fewer than they were. The herd that stands at this river is not the herd that left the dry valley 12 days ago. It is smaller by perhaps 30 animals, some lost to exhaustion, some to predators, some to the simple, quiet mathematics of a body that reaches the limit of what it can sustain on the road between there and here. 30 animals that set out with the same instinct as the rest, driven by the same signals, following the same direction. The difference, in the end, was not courage or will. It was the small, invisible margins of body weight and joint health and immune function and luck that determine, in the end, which bodies a migration keeps and which it takes. This river does not know the cost of their arrival. It simply flows. Migration is one of the oldest strategies in the history of life. Long before mammals, long before birds, long before anything we would easily recognize as familiar, animals were moving. Following rainfall. Following seasons. Following the slow pulse of a living planet cycling through abundance and scarcity with indifferent regularity. Scientists believe that large-scale migrations in the Cretaceous were common, driven by the same forces that drive migrations today. The geometry may have changed. The animals are different. But the logic has not changed at all. When the food runs out, you move. When the water is gone, you move. You move because the alternative is not moving, and the alternative to not moving is the end. This herd will rest here. They will recover, slowly and incompletely. Some of the older individuals will not fully regain what they lost on the journey. Some of the juveniles that survived will carry the experience encoded in ways that may, over time, shape how they respond to drought, to movement, to the first faint signals of change in the air. And when the rains fail again, and they will fail again, the herd will move. It will always move. Not because it chooses to. Not because it understands what it is doing or why. But because the ones that did not move are gone, and the ones that are left carry, in every cell, the inherited answer to the question the land keeps asking. Nature is not cruel. It is not kind. It is only relentlessly, quietly itself. And the herd walks on.